Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of the Green Sofa Dialogue. Today I'm joined by Isabel Rukpost, Secretary General of the European Seaports Organization, coming to us from Brussels, and Professor Manfred Eichner, Head of the Institute of Combustion Technology at the German Aerospace Center. Isabel, Manfred, welcome. I want to ask you both, what's the current status of the energy transition in the aviation and shipping sectors? And Isabel, why don't I ask you first, where are we now when it comes to low emissions and shipping?
Yes, because I cannot talk so much about aviation, I'm afraid. So it's not really my sector, even if maritime and aviation sometimes work together in practice, because as you know, I represent European seaports, the interests of the European seaports here in Brussels. And so ports are, in fact, bringing together all the modes. I mean, so we are really, ports are hubs of transport. And of course, the rationale, the raison d'être is to link the maritime with the land transport. But you see that also there are in some ports really links for cargo between the maritime and the and aviation as well. But that just to frame it, the greening of maritime transport is a real priority and a must for European ports. And what we have to see is that since 2018, there has been a shift a bit in the mentality, I think, of the European, at least the European shipping lines, because in the International Maritime Organization, they came to a first goal setting to really reduce the emissions. So that is, I think, very important. But at the same time, if we look at, so we now have this target, we also have the Green Deal target, which is the European target for decarbonization, which goes even a lot further than which will imply much more reductions than what was convened at the international level. But what we see, for instance, in the latest report of the IMO on the situation of the greenhouse gas emissions of maritime, is that they say it was a quite alarming report, the fourth report. It came out a couple of weeks ago, and there they say that if no action is taken, then the greenhouse gases will go up by 50%. They also see that the share of shipping in the greenhouse gas emissions went up a little bit. You know, in the total man-made or man-created emissions went up a little bit. The carbon intensity has gone down a lot. And but the progress in going down has also slowed down a bit the last years. But as I said, the good news is that we see that there is a willingness with the shipping lines to change gear and to change direction, and that is, I think, very promising. And also because now I create like a quite alarming picture of shipping in terms of greening, and it's just, I mean, we are with the climate change and so on. It's not a secret. It's priority number one, and everyone will go. We need to go on this path of greening, but we should also at the same time not forget that in fact maritime transport is the most energy efficient transport mode at the moment to transport cargo. I mean, because you can in a ship transport in one time a lot of cargo, so it's very energy efficient, but it doesn't mean it's green. It should improve.
Manfred, the same question for you. Where are we now when it comes to low emissions and aviation?
In aviation, the situation is that we, for more than 10 years now, work on this issue. And about 2009, I think, was the first commercial flight even with an alternative fuel. And this alternative fuel, at that time, was already reducing CO2 and pollutants like soot particles and so on. However, that was always demonstration flights. So one flight here, a second flight somewhere else, and then there were flight connection between Hamburg and Frankfurt for half a year, but it's a short distance and a half a year. So that was the largest amount of alternative fuels which were used. It was 1,500 tons. So this is a small amount compared to the amount you would need really to help the climate. And that was increased in the last years, but very slowly. And now we are in the situation that this amount of fuel which has to be used, or sustainable fuel which has to be used, has to be increased by a dramatic factor. So we talk about the increase of the sources for these fuels, especially when we talk about biofuels. Biofuels, a major issue is really to increase the sources for these biofuels. And the second is the regulation. There's a lot of discussions going on whether this is really a sustainable solution when we use grain or other plants. There's a lot of discussions going on. I'm sure there is a sustainable solution, but we have to select the kind of fuels we are really using. We have to control it as well. And then the second step is to increase the quality of these fuels. Up to now, we use mainly biofuels, which are good enough to reduce CO2 and maybe also a bit of pollutants. However, there's a better chance with, we name it electrical fuels or power to X fuels. So we use electricity to produce hydrogen, and from the hydrogen, we then produce liquid hydrocarbons, which could be used instead of kerosene. They have a better quality in chemical sustainability. They don't produce any more pollutants like soot particles. You can reduce NOx reduction, and they are free of CO2, really free. So they're much better. However, the technical readiness level is much lower. We know all the components we need to produce such a fuel. However, we have not done it in a large scale up to now. So we have to increase now the scale from liters or kilograms to tons, and then to 100,000 tons. And at the final end, we need 10 million tons per year. So this is an extreme increase in size and in amount. So that's the two challenges which we have. The situation in this shareholders community is very good. The airlines are ready to use it. The airports are ready to really deliver it. There are a bit a question, who will invest large money to produce 10 million tons per year, means investment of tens and hundreds of billions of euros or dollars, it doesn't matter in this case. So who is investing all this money? And what is the business case? How safe are the people who are investing some money that they get the money back over the next 10 years? Because this is a regulation situation where they need a safety for the business case for 10 years time to get the money back. So this is an open question. Then the technical quality, as I said already, is not really finalized, could be still improved. And then this, we name it Hochlaufen. So it's something like increasing the scale of, I'm not sure what's the English expression for it is.
I think we would say ramping it up. So something like this.
Good. I would understand this expression. Ramping it up. This the control and as I said already, regulations, because I think the society has to decide what they like to accept and what they don't like to accept, and what they are ready to pay. One point is also it will be more expensive than crude oil. Crude oil is just the cheapest stuff we could have, and everything else will be more expensive. So the question is, how much money do we really pay for it? What we are willing to pay? What's the technical quality, and how to do the wrap-up?
Do we have any answers yet? Do we have any places to go? Okay, how do we hochlaufen? How do we scale it? Or how do we ramp it up? Or how do we the questions that you've opened here. We need to select these types. We have to improve quality. Do we have any answers yet when it comes to aviation?
Yeah, there are several roadmaps available. I think in each country and also in Europe, there are roadmaps available, and they tell that it is possible to do this job in the next 10 years to a level which was agreed in the Paris meetings. So to achieve 40% of CO2 reduction till 2030. The roadmaps show that this is in principle possible. The problem is, of course, society has to support it, and we have to do really a fast and good job the next 10 years to achieve it. But in principle, it's possible to achieve it in the next 10 years. Yes.
So a 40% reduction in the next 10 years, what do we have to do to get, let's address aviation first, and then Isabel will come back to you for shipping. What do we have to do to decarbonize by, say, 2050?
Okay, that means we nearly have to put CO2 to nearly zero. Yeah. Doesn't matter whether it's 95% of reduction of CO2 or 100%. There's still a discussion going on what's really needed. But that means really replacing crude oil totally. And this means we have to go on this roadmap 20 more years. And that is possible. If we achieve the 2030 targets, it's not an easy way to go to 2050, but 20 more years for, in principle, same technologies. It may be that we improve the technology each year a bit. That is possible. The big issue, some people believe, is that do we have enough renewable energy on Earth? And we don't have in Germany, and we don't have it in Belgium, or let's say even in Europe, it will be difficult. Europe, we have an area where it's relatively good. That is the south of Europe. The sun is shining double as much as in Germany. But it's much better in the sun belt of the Earth. And it doesn't matter whether you go to the desert, like Sahara, or whether you go to the ocean. Please remember, 73% of the Earth is water. And that means we have to go to the oceans as well, but there is more than enough sun to feed all this renewable energy. But that means we need an import strategy for Europe, especially for Germany, but not only for Germany, but for Europe, to get all this renewable energy to Europe. And that means we don't have it as electricity. We have to have it as a chemical energy carrier, like a hydrocarbon fuel, like hydrogen in a liquid form, or maybe methane, which is being used by the aviation and by the shipping as well. Yeah. I can imagine that liquid hydrogen is used, or liquid methane is used in both cases, just as an example.
And Isabel, what can we do to decarbonize shipping by 2050?
What I think to decarbonize the shipping sector, I think it's I see a lot of parallel with in a way, like in the way to do it, and the same issues are there for the shipping sector as for the aviation. It's that there are different pathways ongoing in a way. Maybe there are even more pathways possible in shipping than in aviation, and maybe Manfred can correct me with that. And that we are in this phase where you see a lot of promising technologies developing, but with all their constraints at the moment still. So what we think is alternative other fuels or other technologies is the first thing, but there is no silver bullet at this moment. So we have these different technologies. Then you could say, as a legislator, we oblige one technology. But we and I see it from the port side, because I'm not representing the shipping lines or the shipping sector, but the port sector. We don't think that you can now go and for one do technology picking. That would be wrong, because there are different promising technologies developing at the same time. And we also see that different technologies will be possible for different segments of shipping and maybe for different kind of ports. Let's say, for instance, one of the technologies that is considered as already available is onshore power supply, so that you plug in, the ship is plugging in when it is at berth, and so it can just put their engines down. You do not have any emissions from the ship. But of course, this implies that if you want to have real gains in sustainability and in carbon, that your grid, that's where the electricity comes from, that it's not coming from coal or whatever, because otherwise you're moving the emissions from berth to the coal plant maybe 100 kilometers further. So that is one issue. At the same time, the OPS is very useful also, for instance, for ferries on short journeys, because they can use it as well as the power to do the crossing. But for deep sea, you cannot go just charge like you charge your phone and do the whole voyage with the charge electricity. So that is one thing. So this is one option that in a way is already being installed, because it's a very good solution for diminishing local pollution in and around the ports. But it's not greening the shipping sector as such. Then we have to go for all the other possible technologies, look at them, and then we believe it's important to create, it was also, the word was also mentioned by Manfred, the word of roadmaps. We are, as ports, in favor of that. Even each individual port, or maybe a range of ports or connecting ports, are developing a kind of, we have this clear, the shipping lines have this clear goal to reduce. How will they do it? Which customers do I have in my port? And which pathways, what is the best to invest in? Because for the shipping to green, the ports will have to facilitate this. Onshore power supply, this is a very costly operation for a port. There is no business case. So there is no return on investment for the investing port authority. So they will even almost always need some funding, extra funding to have it paid. So there we want to really have that each port could make its roadmap and say, I see, looking at my customers, the kind of segments of shipping I have, these can be the technologies, and this can be 100% OPS, onshore power supply, for one port, but this could also be that one port is really investing a lot in hydrogen, because they see that their customers will be over time using hydrogen. And if you are using hydrogen, then in fact you make, or if you will be using hydrogen, you will make the whole installation on onshore power supply over time redundant. So this is the very difficult issue for investments now. As a port as well, our the investment means are restricted. So you cannot, maybe the very big ports in Europe, they can go for all options or accommodate different options, but it's not for everyone possible. And even for a big port, because a port area is big, you cannot have all options on each quay. So therefore, we really think of narrowing down through coalitions where shipping lines and ports, but also energy providers, because this is, I think, the important aspect in this debate. Where is there the supply of energy? Is there enough? And it was also mentioned by Manfred, is there enough availability? Will there be enough availability? You can say, we will ban this kind of fuel, or we will promote this kind of technology by this date, but it can be technologically possible, but is there enough available if everyone makes the shift to this energy? So these are all questions that have to be solved now. It's quite tricky. but we really believe a bit in a crossing of encouraging at policy level, but at the same time, not closing, not saying we go for A and B and we ignore or we do not allow C and D to develop. We really believe in the force of innovation, and we will need a lot of support in funding for innovation for all these promising technologies. And of course, the issue will also be that not each mode is developing maybe different solutions. If one solution can also be used for different modes of transport, that creates a bigger market and probably also economies of scale to use it. So we believe that is important. And but as also Manfred is saying, we won't probably in Europe have enough of these renewables at some point, and we will need to import them. And there also ports can play a role in the supply and in the supply of these energies, and bring them in Europe if needed, and organize themselves for that. So I think this is a bit.
I want to stay with you for a minute, Isabel. We don't have a silver bullet, and you talk about OSP, so onshore power supplies. Are there any other promising technological solutions or innovations that you'd like to speak to?
In the fuel mix, what I want to say, there is this multi-fuel future. Some even speak, but I'm not a technical person, but of combining even different fuels or different solutions in one voyage. That is also a solution. But what we should also see is, to say now this one or that, hydrogen, methanol, ammonia, there are, I think, all projects running at the same time. Europe is putting a lot of emphasis on hydrogen. Because I think there is also the different levels of hydrogen, the clean one or the renewable one, and then the less renewable one. So we have to see. But what I think is next to the change of fuel, that you can also work on, for instance, making the transport as such more efficient. So we'll see that ships do not have to wait, that ports do not have to wait for ships, that you avoid, and this is indirectly, but it can play a role, that a ship in a port does not have to wait too long for the cargo coming from the hinterland, so that you avoid this, you solve certain bottlenecks, so certain missing links, and make the transport, the supply chain more efficient. You also see that the ships are filled, that you are not going with empty ships, with empty trains, with empty trucks. This is also a part of the solution. So I think there are also different ways to stimulate certain technologies. Also tax-wise, onshore power supply is also something that is taxed. So if the ship is running on its own fuels, let's say, it's running on fuels that are exempted of taxation, because this is an agreement at the international level. But if they plug in most of the member states, the electricity comes with taxation. So is taxed and not exempted from taxation. So this already discourages the user to go for this solution, because it's a more costly solution. And I think the current crisis is not helping, because the oil prices are going down or have gone down drastically. So the gap with all the renewables will become even bigger in price.
You mentioned hydrogen, and Manfred, I want to talk with you about hydrogen in a second, but since you just brought this up, Isabel, let's talk about some of the political framework that we need. In addition to what do we need in terms of policy to help decarbonization happen at ports?
I think it's not the decarbonization. I think what we need is a framework that stimulates innovation research, that takes away barriers, that motivates maybe this supports the way of coalitions to bring all stakeholders together. These are things we think are very important elements to boost things like hydrogen. We see that at different European ports that they are really putting in place this kind of how would I say, kind of consortia or kind of corporations where they put all the partners together to use really hydrogen, not only for the shipping side, but also for the industry in the port. So really make it more interesting, make them hydrogen hubs, where for different reasons you can use and you can be there and you can import and so on, use hydrogen. So make the business case bigger. So these are every encouraging policy for that. And I must say that Europe has, the European Commission recently launched a hydrogen strategy. They I think, really want to push for hydrogen extensively. So we must see, I mean, how this goes. And but it's really not working, not everyone in its own corner, not every mode alone, I think, and not even every sector alone. It will be the modes together, the transport modes together, but also together with the industry. And so all users together to find solutions. And certainly the debate with the energy suppliers will be so, because we have to look at them, the energy suppliers. What are you doing? How quickly can you progress? How quickly do you see a solution? I think it's mainly in their hands. And then you just need a supportive policy, maybe to also close the price gap. That will be important.
Manfred, I see you listening very intently, but I can't tell what you're thinking. Why don't you share some of your thoughts with us about political frameworks?
Political framework is just a part. If you allow, I would like to go to the question hydrogen, yes or no, and the silver bullet first, because that was a question which I think is maybe to discuss before we come to the political framework. In the aviation, we differentiate between drop-in fuels. Drop-in fuels are such you can mix with the kerosene of today, with crude oil-based kerosene in each part, and you just replace the kerosene by these drop-in fuels as much as you can, by 5%, by 10%, by 90%, by 100%, that's fine. They will not change the infrastructure, they will not change the airplanes, they can just be used. Then we have, and that is what we have today, and that is what we will have the next 10 years. They are not good enough to achieve, they are good enough to achieve the 2030 targets, but they are not good enough to achieve the 2050 targets. So for the time after 2030, we will have the near drop-in. Near drop-in means that still liquids. You can still use the same kind of airplanes, but you may have to replace a ceiling. So small pieces in the airplane, but you still have the same airports, you still have the same infrastructure, same filling stations, and the same airplanes, maybe small changes in ceilings and some small pieces. And they will last for at least additional 10 years. And then we may have the known drop-ins. Known drop-ins, for example, gaseous. And gaseous means it may be hydrogen, it may be methane, whatever. Hydrogen is probably the one which comes first. And that means we need a totally new infrastructure at the airports, in the logistics, in the shipping, by the way, of this stuff. And we need new airplanes, totally new airplanes, which have a totally different looking out, because liquid hydrogen, you need 5 times more volume than for kerosene. And that does not fit in the wings anymore. So you need a new structure, and that changes the central point of the airplane. So you get even different design of them and outlook of the airplanes. So you can imagine that this means a lot of preparation, a lot of time to do it, and a lot of money. Whether it ever comes or not, we check at the moment. We will check in the next 5 years whether it will ever come. But if it is coming, it will be after 2040. So that gives you a bit the feeling for hydrogen. Hydrogen is very important to produce liquid hydrocarbons as a step in between, as an intermediate. But it will be probably not in the distribution. And I guess it's not as sharp as for aviation, for shipping, but it will be very similar. Also, ships may change a bit if they use liquid hydrogen. By the way, if they use pressurized hydrogen, it's even 3 times more. So then we have more than 10 times the volume of the tanks. And that means we probably have a different ship construction. And the infrastructure will change also. So hydrogen will be a solution which may be helpful, which may be the silver bullet at the final end, but first or earliest at 2040, and it's not sure whether we really do it in this way. That's a comment I like to do. If you like me to go to the regulation or the political environmental question, that is of course reflected now. As long as we are in this field of the drop-ins, we need a regulation which allows to bridge the differences between these drop-ins and today's crude oil. The difference is mainly the price. The difference but the people buying it is mainly the price. We will always have a more expensive sustainable aviation fuel than a crude oil-based aviation fuel. And the difference is today a factor of 5 to 10, and it will be tomorrow maybe a factor of 2. A factor of 2 means doubling the price. And that is the same for aviation or shipping. So shipping has to realize it as well. So what we need from political environment is a help to start this, or to start the investments, to run up the fabrication sites, to improve the technical quality even more, and so on. So we need a kind of starting help. But secondly, we need a long-term bridging element to compensate the price difference, which will be the same for, which will be also there in future. So that has to be bridged in a way, and that can be done by a quote. So airlines are demanded to have 20%, 50% of sustainable aviation fuel to be burned, and they are forced to. That may be done by a CO2 price. Each ton of CO2 costs so and so much money, or euros, but that has to be a price which is in the size of hundreds of euros per ton CO2, not by 25 or something like this. It has to be 250 or 300 or something like this. Or there are many other points. And most experts, which I know, are believing that we need a couple of different measures that will be not done by one CO2 price or one quote or whatever. But all of this mechanism, all of these tools have advantages and disadvantages. We need all. And of course, it's and what is also done in the regulation, we have to find the acceptance of the people. As long as the people believe that such an aviation fuel, as such a sustainable fuel is not good per se, there may be advantages and disadvantages. It's difficult to convince them to pay for it. So we need a regulation which is guaranteeing that there is no other damage to the environment done, that we don't use palm oil, that we don't use grain or any kind of food, that all the technical fabrication methods are clean and environmental friendly and so on. So we have to have a regulation which is guaranteeing for the people that this is really sustainable and helpful for the environment. I can go, but I think I give you the chance to put the next question to me. Or
Maybe just if you speak about acceptance and so on, so because this debate is also taking place in shipping and maritime, and I mean, if we talk about maritime, of course, in ports there is also a lot of passenger transport. 400 million people each year go on and off ferries or cruise. Cruise is only a minor part of the passenger transport, but we mainly talk about cargo in shipping. And there we see and we think that both on the shipper side, I mean the cargo owners, there will be an increasing how would I say demand to have a sustainable supply chain. You already have quite some movement of big cargo owners who are in this kind of commitments, who really are pushing, like, we want to have our products being brought in a sustainable way to the customer. And this we see a bit combined as well with the whole digitalization processes, where you will be able to trace and to measure the carbon footprint from going to A to B by different means, or by maybe through different kind of ships or shipping lines, or taking different routes, that you will be able to really measure the carbon footprint. And so that this will maybe also direct and push the demand for cleaner fuels and push the shipping sector, or all the operators in the transport sector, in the supply chain, to green. We see from the port side, because a port is really at the crossing between land and sea. The ship sails away, but the port remains. It's like the plane flies away, but the airport is there. So I guess what airports face, it's also what seaports are facing. If there is a problem with a ship, or if there is a problem with a plane, if people see the black smoke or whatever coming from a ship, they will afterwards go, they do not know who was the ship, or who it was, or where was the cause, but it's the port who will be blamed in a way for being the place where there are so much emissions. So there is this mission and this drive of European ports to really also push their customers to go for sustainability and to go for solutions. Of course, this is not enough to change and to go for the greening, because, as you say, there will be a need for so much money and investments to support this greening and innovation, to support this greening process. And certainly, if we talk about you talk about the replacement of the planes, and of course, if we talk about the replacement of the ships, but also on the port side, if you have to do asset replacement, it's not something that is done overnight. It takes a long time. It's going very slowly, because you need the planning, you need the authorizations also for all the fuels, for all the new fuels. If you want to bunker them, you have to make the regulations for bunkering in a safe way. For each new technology, this all requires time, and so you need authorizations. You need even maybe to reorganize the space in the port to accommodate to facilitate these new roles, being a supplier of renewable energies. So this all takes so much time, and you cannot change overnight. And time and money will be so crucial to get to the goal. Yeah, I heard from one of the Swedish colleagues in my office saying we should hurry slowly, and this is, we are under pressure because there is the goal, and this is, I think, we think very important, and there is this goal, but at the same time we have to take our time in finding the good solution.
Speaking of time, we're almost out of time. I want to ask before we wrap up, Manfred, do you have one wish for 2021 when it comes to what we've been talking about today?
Yes, it's by luck or by accident, whatever you like. I like to build up with a consortia, of course, not by me alone, but together with some competent people. I like to build up a fabrication site for Power-to-X kerosene for 10,000 tons a year. Sounds a bit less, but or a small amount, but it's the next step which we have to do to really bring up the production side to an industrial size and to commercial size, which is useful. So this is the next step, and I'd like to do it in 2021. Yes, correct.
Thank you. Isabel, briefly, do you have one wish for 2021?
That we, because I'm trying to support the policy in the right direction, and we have the big projects of the Green Deal and also the recovery of Europe after COVID. And I just hope that we find a good framework that is stimulating innovation, but also boosting the sector and helping this shipping sector, but certainly also the port sector as hub of transport and energy, to recover and really take this economy into a sustainable but a strong European economy, so that ports can really be one of the pillars of that and supporting pillars of that.
Thank you both so much for your time today. Isabel Rückpost, Manfred Eichner, thank you both so much for joining us. Have a great day.